Day 152, June 1st, all works for our good, Romans 8 verse 28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8 verse 28. What a wonderful promise that is set before us in this verse. It tells us of a benefit which comes upon all who love God, a benefit which is all-encompassing and unqualified. All things work together for good to them that love God. As Bible teachers so often emphasize when they teach on this verse, all means all. The reason that this emphasis is needed is because, while we love to quote this promise, so few of us, if any, have come to believe it in its full scope. We find it easy to believe that God is working all good things for our good, but what about the evil things? Do we really believe that God is working all things for our good? Consider how most Christians react when an evil person is elected to an important government position. Do they have this promise in their mind? Do they truly believe that God is working that evil person's term for their good? What about when Christians see increasing persecution all around them? Do they have this promise in mind? If we were to just take a general survey of the church during times when evil is becoming stronger, we would find that many Christians do not react in a way which would evidence the belief in this promise. We hear fear and worry when we would expect to hear trust and faith in God. Clearly, a very large percentage of professing Christians have little to no faith in this promise. In fact, if we are really honest in examining ourselves, we will find that every one of us have, in effect, rejected this promise just by our actions. In order to build up our faith so that we might truly realize the fullness of this promise, we will examine some fascinating scriptures throughout the Bible, scriptures which reveal that our God really is in complete control of all things. The first verse we will make note of is found in the book of Judges, and it describes how God was responsible for Israel's suffering at the hands of the Midianites. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. Judges 6 verse 1. It is certain that, when the Midianites swept through Israel, taking their crops, herds, and possessions, most Israelites would not have supposed that the invasion was of God. In fact, as is often the case, they probably were questioning where God was, or if he even existed. Little did they know that, except for God allowing it, the Midianites could not have set one foot on Israel's land, regardless of how many camels they had or how strong they were. Now, let's connect this principle to our own time. Are we questioning why evil seems to be getting worse and worse? Have we failed to realize that ultimately, it is God who has determined these events to occur? This does not mean that all evil is a punishment for sin. The book of Job proves that's not the case, but it does mean that all things are happening the way they are happening because God is causing them to happen that way. The Bible explicitly declares that God worketh all things after the counsel of his own will, Ephesians 1 verse 11. Again, all things means all things, yes, even evil things. Could it really be that God is the one behind all of the evils in the world? This is an extremely important question, but there is great danger in answering it unscripturally. First, we will explain the two wrong answers to this question. One wrong answer is to brush off the question, asserting that God is in no way responsible for evil. The following verses clearly show that God is, in some way, responsible. I form the light, and create darkness, I make peace, and create evil, I the Lord do all these things. Isaiah 45 verse 7. Who is he that saith, and it cometh to pass, when the Lord commandeth it not? Out of the mouth of the Most High proceedeth not evil and good? Lamentations 3 verses 37 to 38. Shall a trumpet be blown in the city, and the people not be afraid? Shall there be evil in a city, and the Lord hath not done it? Amos 3 verse 6. Many Christians have said that the word evil in these verses is a mistranslation, and that it should be rendered as calamity or disaster, but the Hebrew word does not have such a narrow meaning. It does not only speak of natural evils such as calamity. In fact, it is the same word used to describe the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Genesis. The second wrong answer is to accuse God of being evil because of the fact that he wills and allows it. While the Bible does teach that God is ultimately responsible for evil, it also teaches that he is not evil, nor does he commit evil, nor does he delight in evil, nor is he culpable for evil. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. 1 John 1 verse 5. God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. James 1 verse 13. For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee. Psalms 5 verse 4. With these two incorrect answers dismissed, we can turn our attention to the answer that the Bible implies to be correct. The answer is that, while God is ultimately and sovereignly responsible for all evil, he is in no way culpable or deserving of blame for it. God has decreed all evil since before the beginning of time to arise for the purpose of glorifying him, but decreeing this evil to occur for his good ends is not an evil act. To do evil, even with good intentions, is evil, but God never does evil. He does that which only a sovereign God can do, he decrees it. Notice how, even in the worst part of the end times, God is going to be in complete control of the wicked. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. Revelation 17 verses 16 to 17. When we come to a realization that all things are of God, we will be strengthened to trust that God is working all things for our good. Having dealt with how God works all things for the good of those who love him, we can turn our attention to those who love him. Who exactly are these people who love God, who are the called according to his purpose? Although we have covered this in many of our prior meditations, let's attempt to find an answer from Paul's letter to Rome. The following verses in this very chapter provide us with an implied answer. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. So then they that are in the flesh cannot please God. Romans 8 verses 7 to 8. Notice that the carnal mind is enmity, or hostile, against God. This reminds us of Paul's statement in Colossians where he says that we were sometime alienated and enemies in our mind by wicked works, Colossians 1 verse 21. People who serve their fleshly lusts are enemies of God and cannot possibly be subject to God's law. What is God's law in this context? Paul answers this very question later in Romans. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet, and if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. Romans 13 verses 9 to 10. As this excerpt proves, God's law is the law of love, and carnally minded people cannot be subject to it because they have not had the love of God shed abroad in their hearts. They do not love God because they love their sin. With this in mind, we can see, from the book of Romans alone, that those who love God are those who have been delivered from carnality. They have been delivered from being servants of the flesh unto being servants of God in love. It is for these people, who are true God lovers, that God works all things for good. Those who are called according to his purpose are those who have been called out of carnality. In light of today's meditation, there are 2 primary points which we need to remind ourselves of and reflect upon. First, we need to have a conscious awareness of the fact that all things are of God. Secondly, we need to trust that God is working all things for our good, but only if we are truly those in whom the love of God dwells. God doesn't work all things for the good of the wicked, but only for his redeemed saints. Therefore, we need to be sure that we are those who love God, and if so, we need to be sure that God is working all things for our good.